Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Motivational Monday. My name is Kira. I am your host, and I have a beautiful co host here with me today. We have our very own Susie Ruth, and she'll get a formal introduction in just a moment. I actually have two questions for you. One, drop 111 in the chat if this is your first Life Guides event. And drop 222 in the chat if you've been here before and you love what we're doing and you just can't help but want to get more of it. Oh, welcome. So happy to have you, Susan. Welcome back, Julanda and Jennifer and Patty. A lot of these names I've seen multiple times. Welcome, Stephanie. Welcome, Allie. Oh, wait. Oh, wow, I love that. Loved the first one. And this is just your second one. I love it. Well, today we have a really cool conversation. And before we dive into that, I just want to let you all know what Life Guides is because I feel like a lot of people are starting to know us for our events, which I love. But also, there's a deeper layer to Life Guides, which is where we have one on one mentorship and coaching on a professional and personal level with our beautiful guides. Susie Ruth is one of them. So if you do relate to the things that we're talking about, the conversation, and you're like, wow, I could really use someone to talk to in regards to this, we're here for you, and Susie is a great person to go to. They say that Life Guides is more qualified than a friend and more casual than therapy. So this isn't like a clinical therapy setting where someone is diagnosing things that you've been through. It's more of like, hey, this is what I've been through. And your guide is like, oh my gosh, I've been through something similar. This is how I've navigated it. And then you navigate a little differently and you get to grow and have a guide through your life, just helping you navigate your own life. So that's like the short and sweet of what Life Guides is. Obviously, we could go so deep, but that's not what we're going deep on today. Today, we are going deep on a really cool topic that Susie, Ruth, and I are both passionate about. And we are talking about the body remembers, understanding stored trauma. So, how trauma stays in the body, how we continue to operate through life with trauma, and the ways that we can start to unpack some of the wildness that we've been through. So we have our very own Susie Ruth here. She is an end of life doula, mind body life coach, and specialist in emotional healing. With over 30 years of experience in body work, she blends physical and emotional healing to guide clients through life's transitions and challenges. Drawing from the body keeps the score, Susie recognizes that the body holds memories of past experiences and uses somatic practices to help clients reconnect, heal, and find balance. So, welcome, Susie Ruth. We are so happy to have you. I feel like I want to just dive right in because I know you and I can talk forever on these topics. So, can you give us a little bit of an introduction into what even is trauma? And for those of you who are listening, drop 333 in the chat if you are aware of what trauma is to begin with. And you can drop 444 in the chat if you're like, I've never really had these conversations. And either way, you're going to get a whole dose of it today. So yeah, an introduction would be perfect to what trauma is, Susie.
Oh, thanks. So I got interested in trauma about 25 years ago as a massage therapist. I took a myofascial unwinding class, which was kind of like releasing trauma that's been stored in the body, and read the book Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. And he talks about trauma in he studied animals, and he specifically studied, like, I think it was a gazelle or an antelope that was being chased by a lion. And the lion was like chasing it, chasing it, chasing it. And then the lion pounced but missed. And usually the cameras will stay on the lion and they don't really watch what happens to the gazelle after that moment. But if the cameras were to stay on the gazelle, it will shake, it will lay down. Sometimes they even look like they're dying. They like open their mouths and they like really, like, it looks like they're dying. You'll see this in birds too. After a bird hits the window, if you watch the bird after it hits the window, it'll roll over on its back and its feet will come in and it will look like it's dying. They'll tremble and then they like process this trauma. Then they take a deep breath, they jump up, and then they fly away. Or this gazelle, in other words, he gets up after this traumatic experience and just starts grazing again. Like, they processed that trauma. But people, we don't do that. We rationalize it. So you're driving down the freeway, a big, huge semi truck you see it's coming for you. You think it's going to hit you, and then it doesn't. and then your fingers go numb and you feel that traumatic event. But what we do is we like, oh, shoot, I'm so glad that didn't happen. And I got to keep going to work. What we're supposed to do is probably pull over, cry, experience that, let it out, shake it off, let all of the energy come out of your body. But we don't. We hold it in there and it never expresses itself. So that's kind of one way to look at trauma. Of course, um, like the way that that they describe it in Body Keeps the Score is that it's kind of, I think, an event that something, any kind of event that is too much for ourselves to process. So it could be traumatic for one person and not traumatic for another. So, what do you think about trauma?
I love these conversations so much because I've read The Body Keeps the Score and I've done a lot of work around trauma. And it very much is that subjective, it's different for everyone. And I thought was really fascinating in listening to The Body Keeps the Score. And there was a lot in it that makes so much sense for why I am the way that I am because as humans, we go through traumatic things, but in our society, we aren't given any tools to navigate it. And we're very good at continuing to move on and continuing to do things. And there were a lot of things where I didn't realize that the way that I am in so many ways is because of trauma that I didn't process. And I was like, wow, I am so resilient and headstrong because I've always had to put myself in positions where something crazy happens and then I continue moving forward. But that is absolutely a trauma response, not looking back, not feeling the emotions, being afraid of that part of the journey. And there's one story in The Body Keeps the Score where, and some of you may have heard of this actually. I don't know how many years ago it was, but in Canada, there was either a warm front or a cold front that came through. I'm not sure, but what happened was on this highway, all of a sudden the road is clear. And then they hit this huge wall of fog where you can't even see 5 feet in front of you. And it ended up causing like an 80 car pileup. And there was a couple in one car where a semi truck went over them and then they had other cars that went under them, and they were both stuck in the car, the husband and wife, but they had two very different responses. And this is where trauma comes in. A lot of our trauma responses are based on the way that we handled things in our childhood. So if we learned in our childhood that the best way to stay out of harm, to not get yelled at, to be rewarded, to be recognized was to shut down and go away and avoid a situation, just like the wife in this car, she froze. Because in her childhood she learned I will be safe when I freeze, she froze in the car and she didn't do anything to get herself out of the vehicle. The husband, he had learned in his childhood, I will fight to get myself out of situations. I will be able to utilize my body and my resources to get myself out of situations. So this couple is sitting right next to each other. She's frozen and he's actively trying to get out of the car and he's looking at her and he's like, I mean, he's not like actively saying it, but he's like, what are you doing? You're not doing anything. We're in the middle of an 80 car pileup. There are cars on top of us and underneath us, and you're just not doing anything. And it's because of the way that they grew up. And then beyond that, when we have a traumatic experience that we don't process, and it's different. I got into a car accident. I rolled my car down 15 feet of an embankment, but because I was able to immediately get out of the vehicle, it did not store as trauma. My body was physically shaking and I felt the emotions and I was like, whoa. But because they weren't able to get out of the vehicle and because they weren't able to save themselves, they did end up getting saved. They did end up living, but then they started doing tests on their brain. And whenever they thought about that car accident, their brain was frozen in the state of which they experienced it at that moment. So they never got out of that state. Whenever they would think about that car accident, whenever something would almost remotely happen that would be a car accident, they would be back in that trauma response immediately. And it's because they couldn't get out of it. So there's that difference too of did you have the ability to navigate out of the situation, or did someone give you the resources to, or did you not? And that's where it starts to hold. So I'm curious, Susie, when we're starting to talk about trauma being stored in the body and what that looks like and what that feels like, can you give us some tangible examples, maybe on an emotional level and a physical level of what that might look like for others?
Definitely. I want to add before I lose this thought. Trauma also can be by omission, and that was the trauma that I experienced. So I was having all this trauma stored in my body. So I was having night terrors, procrastination, ADHD, depression, and I was taking PTSD medication for these night terrors, thinking, I don't understand. I've never been raped. I've never been beaten. I don't understand. I don't know what this trauma, it must be generational trauma. It must have been passed down from my parents, which there's truth to that. But I, all the stories that I have of my childhood are like, oh, when one day when you were crawling age, you crawled out of the house and you crawled up and you were, up in the barn, we're just like a long ways away from where the house was. And we finally found you in the horse corral. Or one time you crawled out into the yard and the telephone man found you with a foxtail in your throat. And he was like running around the neighborhood saying, whose kid is this? So like my trauma is all by omission. Like these stories didn't add up to me that I was neglected. I wasn't beaten, but I cried and nobody came. And that and most trauma is pre-verbal. Almost everyone's trauma is pre-verbal. So when you have,
Can I stop you there for a second? When you say pre-verbal, you mean before the age that we actually are able to vocalize things.
right,
Okay.
which also means that most of us that have this kind of trauma don't have words for it, which was me. I don't know. I was never beaten. I was never raped. I don't know what happened, but I have night terrors every night.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was what interested me in the trauma as my own. When the 25 years ago when I started doing the trauma work, I did it with a physical therapist who was not a psychotherapist, and I was re-traumatizing myself because I wasn't titrating the trauma work. I was just letting my body experience it, and I was going into like the fetal position and shaking and thinking that I was healing myself, but I was actually re-traumatizing myself. So
Can
25 years
we,
later.
before we even move on from that, because they talk about it a lot in this book, about how talk therapy or therapy where you relive a situation can re-traumatize you instead of heal you. And a lot of people go through that, and there's a societal norm that that's what you're supposed to do. What if someone were, say that someone's realizing in this conversation that they've been through a traumatic event, or maybe they don't know what they've been through, but they are realizing, okay, I've got some ways that I operate that aren't normal, or that I don't understand why I am that way. What, in regards to therapy, should they be looking for, and maybe what should they be avoiding? And obviously, everything's different for everyone, but one of the things that it says in this book is that putting yourself in those situations to relive that trauma without having the ability to advocate for yourself or change the scenario can harm you more than it can help you. So I'm curious what your advice would be on that.
Yeah. So number one is you have to see somebody who's trauma informed. You have to talk to someone who's trained as a trauma therapist, who's trauma informed, whether it's a coach or a therapist or a physical therapist or whoever you decide to help you. You have to ask, are they trauma informed? Are they trauma informed? Because, and doctors, that's one of doctors will never, like, I think it's Gabor Mate says, you'll never have a doctor ask you when you come in with an autoimmune disease, what was your childhood trauma experience? Like, that people aren't trauma informed and they're trying to heal people with autoimmune diseases or ADHD, and their trauma, like these are trauma responses, and
Yeah.
yet practitioners aren't asking about childhood trauma. So that's number one. And the other thing I would say is I don't think you can process trauma. And like I said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a therapist. I just have studied a lot of trauma. And I think you're going to agree with me, though, that you have to have somatic processing. You have to find someone who's a somatic coach or a somatic therapist, somebody that processes trauma within the body, teaches you how to feel it in your body and express it from your body, it's not something you can think away. So retelling the traumatic story isn't helpful. It's about processing it in your body that's helpful.
Yeah. And one thing I'll also say as well is if you're on this journey and you're processing some of your things, co-regulation is a very real thing. So ensuring that whoever you're working with, you can just, I mean, I think sometimes we forget that we have choices and we can say no to things. But if you have like one or two sessions with a specific therapist and you don't feel connected to them and you're just showing up because you feel like you're supposed to show up, but you want to do this work, co-regulation is where when you have a bond with someone, whoever it is, your nervous system starts to match their nervous system. So if you're working with someone who is trauma informed, aware of trauma, the way that it works in the body, and the deeper layers of how that seeps into every layer of our life, and then they do somatic processing where they help you move it through your body, and you're co-regulated with them, meaning that they have a safe and regulated nervous system, there's someone that you connect to, then you will have such a more impactful and healthy experience with therapy. And I have a lot of people in my life who have had horrible therapy experiences and say that they never want to go back. And I'm like, I know, I get it, but also what if there was someone who could actually help you and where it would be a different experience? But sometimes therapy re-traumatizes people. So yeah, it's very, very real. Thank you so much for those two main. I love that, Susan. You can fire a bad therapist and start again. I've heard that trauma is stored in the hips and can be addressed through somatic therapy. Yes. And there are practices. Yoga is a great practice for it. They talk about it in the book, how beneficial yoga is because you're moving and breathing through your body. If you have a yoga instructor that you love, again, that co-regulation will help you. When I taught yoga, like 9 classes a week, every class was hip focused because people are storing trauma and emotions in their hips. So, do you have anything else to say on that specific point before we drop into new things?
I want to just say that when you mentioned yoga, man, I think that if you can find a yoga instructor that's trauma informed, you can't go wrong. You're not talking, they're doing breath work, they're working through the body. I mean, it's just like that is such a beautiful place to go. You could find a trauma informed Pilates instructor, gyrotonics expansion, anything that is a movement instructor that people have taken a continuing education in trauma, you can't go wrong.
How do you suggest that people find that? Would it just be a Google search?
I don't know. I guess so. I think so.
We'll say yes. Google has all of our answers. Um,
Oh, I would. And I would type in, um, well, there's so many like the Strozzi Institute is a coaching platform that probably has a directory of people that have done that they do a daily practice of
mm.
somatic practices, and they have a free like it's a very trauma informed. So there's like trauma informed schools that you can look at and find directories of people who've gone through their programs. That's probably how I would find. Um, yeah, I don't know.
No, that's great. I just dropped a link in the chat for everyone too. That's a great resource. So, we know what it looks like and feels like in the body, and I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A for any of you who are listening to this conversation and would like some live feedback or live answers or live consideration or discussion with Susie, Ruth, and I. But how do you know, now we've gone through this journey, right? We know what trauma is. We know ways not to heal it. We know what it feels like in the body. We know potential ways to heal it. Now, what does it look like to actually be on that journey and healing and reconnecting to the body? Maybe you can share your experience of what it's looked like maybe before when you were having those night terrors and what it looks like now. And if you have any specific examples of other people that you've helped, I'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, the number one thing I can say with trauma is it's almost like grief. In my mind, it's almost like grief. It is a daily practice, and it doesn't ever, you can't just, you're never done. You're just never done. It's a daily practice that you work on all the time and recognize. And like my ADHD brain is probably a trauma response. And so when I'm having those bad days, even after all the work I've done, it's one of those days where I say, okay, I do some like, I like do shaking. I do a
Mm.
shaking exercise where I intentionally shake my body or tremor my body, let my body do this. Like there's just different exercises to get your body to shake and release. And I'll make sure that I do that. Even after all of this, I still feel like sometimes your body, it's like conditioned tendencies. We have these conditioned tendencies that we learn when we're little and we keep them with us. And it's like having a belief. They're very hard to change.
Yeah, and the way that the body works on more of like a neuroscience and neuroplasticity level, and this is why it's so important to have someone helping you on your journey as well, is you could be doing so good and you could be building new healthier habits in regards to your trauma and what you've been through. But as soon as something big and bad happens in your life, your body doesn't default to the habit or the practice that you've been developing. It defaults to the one that you've developed the longest and the hardest in your life. So, the reason why AA is so successful with having Christianity at the foundation of it is because you are less likely to go back to your default response if you have something bigger that you believe in. And that's why I'm such an advocate for life guides or therapy or whatever you need to help you on your journey. We're not meant to do it alone. And that's like the simplest way that I could say this. And there are a few people in the chat. Before we go to Q&A, Susie, will you talk a little bit more about the grief aspect and trauma?
Thanks. Well, so grief is my subject. I am a grief specialist just because I came to this work because I realized I had so much grief. But everywhere there's trauma, there's grief.
Hmm.
Everywhere there's grief, there isn't trauma, but everywhere there's trauma, there's grief. They go hand in hand. And so feelings of grief are that feeling of emptiness, that longing for something that is just right out of reach, like that, being so thirsty and having a glass of water right there and not being able to get it. That's grief. Sometimes we have a hard time identifying. Like I've had a coach ask me recently, do people know when they're grieving? And oftentimes they don't. Yeah, it's grief. So that's another avenue thing we can talk about all day long is how to know when you're actually experiencing grief and grief versus depression and things like that. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I want to open up the space for any Q&A. You can drop it in the chat or you can press the Q&A button at the bottom and drop a question in if you have any questions. Um, you can get as personal as you'd like. You can get as general as you'd like. We're here for you. We support you. Um, Jessica says, many times these types of therapies include visualizations. What should people who do not have a mind's eye or visualization capabilities do?
Do you have an answer?
I have a little bit of an answer. I mean, I think my first question would be, do you dream at night? Because if you do, then your body might already have the ability to visualize. But if your brain, there's a couple of different things, but if your brain can't visualize, there's a there might be a trauma that your body is blocking something and blocking something from you remembering. But if a visualization therapy like IFS therapy, Susie, Ruth, you and I are both advocates for IFS. They take you through your own visualization meditation where you kind of see your experience. I'm not a vivid visualizer at all. Mine is very a little bit intangible, a little bit like glossy Polaroid picture sometimes. So it's not like this big vivid thing, but if that doesn't work for you, then you don't necessarily IFS. What is it? What it's parts therapy. What does IFS stand for? Please help me.
Internal family systems.
Internal
So
family systems. Can you give us a little breakdown of IFS?
explain that for a minute because this is how I would probably answer this visualization is um, if you're not a meditator, okay, I don't know that there's any better way to do this than meditate. Meditation is just if we don't do a daily meditation, we try 3 minutes, if only 3 minutes. But usually, people meditate, they try to not think. They'll try to concentrate on their breath. They'll try to think about their breathing. IFS meditations is you go down and you wait for a thought to come. And then as soon as that thought comes, you talk to it. So this is an example. Like you'll have a thought like, this is stupid. And then you've got your first thought. And then it's like, oh, why is it stupid? Well, we're just wasting time and I don't want to be doing this. I'm wasting time. I should be doing the dishes. Oh, why do you think you should be doing dishes? And you have a conversation with that thought. And that thought is actually a part of you wanting to express itself. And we have all of these different parts. So IFS got started with Dr. Schwartz was helping over eaters, girls, young girls who were anorexic or bulimic, and they would say things like, well, a part of me wants to eat, but a part of me doesn't. Or a part of me knows it's right, but a part of me doesn't care. And he's like, well, tell me about the part that wants to overeat. And then they would kind of speak from that part of themselves. And then he'd say, well, tell me about the part that doesn't want to. What does she say? Well, she da da da. And they would start talking from their different parts. And so he developed this IFS. Um, and it's been the most helpful thing I've ever done.
Same. And I've been thinking about going back as well. The one thing I'll say as like a final little piece to IFS before we start closing this out is basically what happens is your brain and your body attempt to protect you when you go through trauma. So instead of being this whole concrete grounded human, you've been segmented now because there are parts of you that are managing you to keep you safe that don't think that you're safe in certain situations. And there are other parts that maybe are fine. But those two different voices are because there have just been pieces of you that have been split off in an attempt to protect. And IFS is attempting to bring that all together and bring the voice into one and understand why you have these other pieces of you trying to protect or manage or coddle or whatever. So we have Allie who said in the chat, I went through a breast cancer diagnosis almost 2 years ago, followed by a series of surgeries as my path for treatment. I've done so much great mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical healing, but a year ago I started having these anxious feelings while driving or in intense traffic that almost feels like claustrophobia and panic. Although I had a lot of anxiety before my diagnosis, this came out of nowhere, and I'm wondering if it could be connected to what I've been through in my cancer journey, and if you have any thoughts on where I can start. If you have a short answer, Susie, please share. And while she's sharing, I'm going to drop her life guides link in the chat as well. If this was a beneficial conversation, and you all have heard me say this, the version of Susie that you have here is the same version that you'll have on a one-on-one call, but she'll be able to get a little bit deeper with you and help you navigate this and create a path that feels good for you. So, do you have anything to say in regards to that?
Yeah, Allie, my first thought is, and like I said, I want to make sure that you know that I'm not a doctor. I'm not diagnosing anything at all, ever. I do want to say that the first feeling I got inside of me was that your body is starting to thaw and that you were in a protective state, which was hiding that anxiety. And now that you're kind of getting back to normal, as you're thawing, more of these emotions are going to start coming up. So I would definitely get help.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Susie, so much for being a part of this conversation. Again, Susie's link is in the chat for those of you who are feeling called to have someone to talk to about all of this and not necessarily in a deeply clinical setting, but more so in a way where you have someone who could support you and who's here for you. Life Guides is a benefit that your employer has paid for you to utilize for free. Unlimited calls with unlimited guides about unlimited topics. So you could talk to Susie Ruth for more of like the grief therapy, somatic healing side of things. And then we have other guides. Like if you wanted to focus on your financial well-being, you could have another guide for that. So this is a pick your own adventure, a choose your own little journey. Again, if you connect with a guide and they're not the guide for you, go to another one. Build a cool bond with someone else. It's okay. We do not take it personally. I'm not made for everyone, but those who I am made for, I am. And the same thing goes for Susie Ruth. So thank you all so much for having us. We will see you next Monday. You have something to say.
I want to say that if you can't get in to see me because I my schedule gets full, reach out to the concierge and we can figure out a time.
Exactly. Thank you. The concierge, there's a chat box right on the Life Guides website.
Definitely send them and say that I said that
Yes.
Susan that she would be.
Say Susie said.
She
Okay.
sent me a link.
Okay, everyone, we are officially at the top of the hour. Have a beautiful day. We will talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.